Speaker Baroness Fox of Buckley.
My Lords, during the committee discussions last week, the Noble Lord, Lord Wolfson of Tredegar, commented on how helpful the debate on presumed parental consent was, and I agree. I felt that I was back on the moral maze. I was so moving around the issue and considering it from all sides. But as the Noble Baronesses Lady Meacher and Lady Butler-Sloss made concrete for us that day, lots of issues thrown up by this proposed legislation are complex and nuanced moral dilemmas, and it shows what a difficult task we have here in applying public law in what is usually the terrain of private and intimate relationships. In some ways, though, that discussion on presumed parental consent focused our minds on the domestic core at the heart of this legislation. And my concern is that this amendment shifts our focus away from that domestic core, although the previous Noble Baroness tried to suggest that we now broaden our understanding of domestic, but that it shifts our focus and broadens it too widely and potentially dilutes it. Don't get me wrong, when at the end of the last committee, the Noble Lords, Lord Marks of Henley-on-Thames and Lord Garnier, and we've heard similar testimony since, when they spoke passionately and movingly on the devastating impact of those reaping the bitter winds of recovered memory syndrome, which has been a dogma, sadly, I was cheering them on. I have indeed been following the bitter memory wars since the 1990s and the consequence of it, such as the satanic ritual abuse panics and various other panics. When that was fashionable, a fashionable theory amongst trauma therapists and sections of social work professionals and some feminist academics, I argued against it. But now actually that form of therapy has largely been discredited by modern memory science and is widely ridiculed, as it has been in this discussion, as pseudo-scientific quackery. I share the Noble Lord's frustrations, however, that the practice is continued, unlicensed and unregulated, and I've no doubt that unethically encouraging vulnerable people to interpret their present woes through the prism of abuse and then unethically planting false memories is coercive. But my worry is that this amendment stretches the definitions of coercive control in the context of domestic abuse too far. There is a danger, to quote a Noble Baroness from an earlier committee day, that this legislation will be seen as a Christmas tree on which everyone can hang a different preoccupation or grievance. That makes the definition so elastic that it can be a catch-all and unintentionally relativise our gaze from the specific and discrete brutality of domestic abuse. I'm already worried that this bill has defined abuse far too promiscuously and that it might well backfire and not help those it's intended to help. It's not just our focus that it will shift, or our gaze as legislators. What about the police and the criminal justice system if we label too many incidents as domestic abuse? Part of the popular frustration with the status quo is that serious incidents or threats or credible risks are not taken seriously, sometimes with tragic consequences. People go to the police and they're sent away. Surely what we don't want are for the authorities and the police to be swamped with endless numbers of complainants citing this bill and a loose basis of a definition of coercive control to actually start making complaints. So, I am all for dealing with and exposing the charlatans who call themselves counsellors, who play on the therapeutic culture and are only too willing to use the issue of abuse to push their own agendas with the consequence of destroying families. Let them indeed be dealt with, and I do hope the Minister will look at how to deal with psychotherapists exploiting those who turn to them for help. But this is not the legislation to pursue this, so I will not be supporting the amendment, even though I cheer on those who wish to expose the charlatans.
Lord Parkinson of Whitley Bay to respond.
My Lords, I'm very grateful to all the noble lords who've taken part in this debate, both today and on Wednesday evening when we began it, and I'm particularly grateful to the noble Lord Marks of Henley-on-Thames for setting out the case for this amendment, which, as he explained, seeks to extend the offence of controlling or coercing behaviour to psychotherapists and counsellors providing services to clients. I thought the noble Lady Baroness Malinieu was right. We have perhaps, as a country, been slow to appreciate the scale of coercive behaviour, and I'm very proud that it was my right honourable friend Theresa May who, in the Serious Crime Act of 2015, provided for the offence of controlling or coercive behaviour in Section 76 of that Act. That offence applies only to those who are personally connected as defined within that section. That means that it applies to intimate partners regardless of whether they live together, to ex-partners who live together, or to family members who live together. The Amendment 141 would extend the offence beyond those who are personally connected as defined by Section 76 of the 2015 Act, so that it applies to psychotherapists and counsellors. Most of the noble lords who spoke in this debate have pointed to evidence and indeed to some harrowing and specific cases suggesting that fraudulent psychotherapists and counsellors, or as they quite understandably referred to them in many cases as charlatans, taking advantage of their position to supplant parents and families in the affections and minds of their clients with the purpose of turning them against them and against their friends and families. The noble Lord Marks has suggested that this abuse should be caught by the controlling or coercive behaviour offence because therapists are abusing their position of trust and the dependence of their clients. We've already had a number of debates in this committee on earlier amendments where my noble friends and I have stressed the importance of preserving the meaning of personally connected for the purposes of the definition of domestic abuse and by extension for the purposes of the Section 76 offence. The controlling or coercive behaviour offence was created in 2015 to fill a particular gap in the criminal law in relation to a pattern of abusive behaviour in an intimate or family relationship. We're not persuaded that what looks like a beguilingly simple act of taking that concept of controlling or coercive behaviour in a domestic abuse setting and applying it to abuses of power by psychotherapists or counsellors should be undertaken without careful and detailed analysis. As the noble Lord Kennedy of Southwark says, the professional-client relationship is a different one, and noble lords have we've had I think a thoughtful but not conclusive debate on definitions of what constitutes domestic setting, what constitutes an intimate relationship. As the noble Baroness Lady Jolly said, these things may take place in the home, but often they won't. My noble friend Baroness Finn explored what constitutes a domestic setting, but it's the personal connection between that matters too. And I agree with the noble Lady Baroness Fox of Buckley that we want to maintain our careful focus on the definition of domestic abuse as it's widely understood and as we want this bill to draw further attention to. And that matters not just, as the noble Baroness Lady Malinieu said, in terms of the architecture of this bill, but as the noble Baroness Lady Fox said, in making sure that the focus of the police and other agencies in tackling the scourge of domestic abuse is tightly focused. So we think that without proper study it wouldn't be right to transplant the concept of controlling or coercive behaviour into what is quite a separate power dynamic. That's not, of course, to downplay the seriousness of this issue or the harrowing examples that noble lords have raised. The government believes that we should look to other remedies to the issue, and it might be helpful to set out some of those that exist in the action that is being taken. There exists already a system of accredited voluntary registration by the Professional Standards Authority for Health and Social Care. That authority has a process for quality assuring voluntary registers of health and care professionals in the UK who are not subject to statutory regulation. It currently accredits 10 voluntary registers relating to counselling and psychotherapy, providing assurance to the public on approximately 50,000 talking therapy professionals. And these registers can be used by service users to choose a practitioner to meet their needs and to be assured that they are safe, trustworthy and competent to practice. To gain accreditation from the Professional Standards Authority, organisations have to meet 11 standards for accredited registers, and these standards require organisations to have a focus on public protection, to have processes in place for handling complaints against practitioners, to set appropriate levels of education and training for entry to the register, to require registrants to undertake continuing professional development, and to understand and monitor the risks associated with the practices of registrants. Any registrant who's removed from an accredited register for conduct reasons cannot join another accredited register. I do recognise, as the Noble Lord, Lord Hunt of King's Heath, said that these registers are voluntary, and we would urge anyone looking to engage the services of a psychotherapist or counsellor to ensure that they are accredited by the Professional Standards Authority. Noble Lords have raised issues which I know have been the subject of separate debates in your Lordship's House, and indeed long-standing debate. My noble friend Lord Garnier and the noble Lord Hunt of King's Heath both referred to their experiences and insights from their times as ministers, and referred to some of the action which has been taken since. And whilst there may be a need to legislate on this matter in the future, that would be a question for the Department for Health and Social Care, and I can't commit them one way or the other today. But for the reasons of focus on the particular offence of domestic abuse, we don't feel that this domestic abuse bill is the right place to do it. And for those reasons, I hope the noble Lord will withdraw his amendment.
I have received requests to speak after the Minister from the following members: Baroness Fox of Buckley, Lord Hunt of King's Heath, Lord Kennedy of Southwark, and I will call them in that order. Baroness Fox.
My Lord, one salutary and useful aspect of this amendment, I think, has been it focuses our mind on false memories and false allegations, and it's therefore a reminder that we must challenge we believe, the victim mindset that can lead to grave injustices. I think the amendment does or should remind the government that abuse is so emotive that it becomes quite hard to challenge if it's alleged. And the reason why false memories have been so damaging over the years is that once the victim says that they were abused under the care or guidance or manipulation or coercive control of said quack counsellor, nobody could challenge it because it was an accusation of abuse. In a piece of legislation that bends the stick in the direction of the victims far too much, in my opinion, could I urge the Minister to take great care here, but also maybe to do some work in investigating some of these false memory syndrome harrowing stories, to maybe learn the lessons and not make the same mistakes with this legislation?
Well, it is. I think the noble lady's right. This is an area which needs continued and careful thought. I think the contributions by the noble Baroness Lady Finlay of Llandaff as well pointed to the complexity of the issues here and the points which have to be considered, and we will indeed do that.